All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is John Bailey. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and it's my privilege to host you today. Last week, President Trump unveiled an ambitious and sweeping AI action plan. The plan outlines a federal strategy around three central pillars: accelerating innovation. This deals with cutting regulatory red tape, creating regulatory sandboxes. We'll talk a lot about AI literacy and workforce issues. A second pillar of building American AI infrastructure. This is emphasizing the critical role of data centers, chip fabrication facilities, and digital infrastructure, as well as energy. And then also leading in global AI diplomacy and security. And that's about making sure that American leadership is setting international standards, promoting transparency, and building a robust system for AI verification and evaluation. Now, I think it's helpful in order to understand this plan. It's helpful to understand how it's being framed. And for there, I think if you go to the White House senior AI advisor David Sachs, he compared this moment to the way that President John F. Kennedy declared a space race with the Soviet Union. And President Trump declared a similar race in terms of America being in an AI race. And he said, and I quote, "Whether we like it or not, we suddenly engage in a fast-paced competition to build and refine this groundbreaking technology that will determine so much about the future of civilization." And he committed America to, quote, "do whatever it takes to lead," asserting clearly that America is the country that started the AI race. And as president, I'm here today to declare that America is going to win it. Now, what's interesting is that shortly after the release of the AI action plan, China unveiled its own comprehensive AI strategy, signaling that this is indeed a global competition. It's intensifying. China's approach emphasized massive investments in AI infrastructure and aggressive talent recruitment, and also asserting some pretty strong international partnerships. And again, it just underscores how significant the stakes have become on this. We have an amazing panel today of experts who are ready to dive into what this plan really means. We want to explore what the game-changing possibilities of AI are, but also spotlight overlooked areas in the plan and really just use this as an opportunity to help us make sense of this technology, AI policy, and also what it can be done in terms of incredible benefits to society, but how do we navigate some of these new tensions and challenges? So I'm going to just introduce our panelists, and then we're going to go into a conversation. We'll pull you in, and you can ask questions, and we'll engage the audience towards the end of this hour. But first, we have Miles Brundridge, who is the executive director of the AI Verification and Evaluation Research Institute, that's known as AVERY. Miles worked at OpenAI as the head of policy research, and he was a senior advisor in AGI readiness. Besides launching AVERY, he is also a non-resident fellow at the Institute for Progress, a member of the AI Policy and Governance Working Group, and a member of the AI Governance Forum at the Center for New American Security. We have Molly Kinder, who is a senior fellow at Brookings and a good friend to all of us. She is an expert in AI and the present and future of work. And at Brookings, she leads a multi-year project examining the impact of Gen AI on work and workers and what to do about it. She has more than 2 decades of experience at the intersection of text, policy, research, and social impact. And then last but not least, we have Will Reinhardt. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Will focuses on the political economy of technology and innovation. His research covers policy areas such as diagnostic testing regulation, federal agency regulatory guidance, the Chips and Science Acts, and also AI. He's an expert at the Federalist Society Emerging Technology Working Group, which is also part of the Regulatory Transparency Project. So, gosh, Molly, Miles, Will, so great to have you. You can come off mute. And we're going to start with a rapid fire question, and we're going to start with Molly, then go to Will, and then end with Miles. But just in one word or phrase, how would you describe the action plan? Molly, we'll start with you.
Very bullish.
Bullish. Okay. Will?
Positive.
Okay. Great. Miles? Miles, you're on mute still. There you go.
Yeah, so I'm going to be slightly more long-winded, but my phrase would be big if true, and by that I mean that it's a very ambitious plan, but executing on it will be a challenge.
Will be a challenge. Okay, we'll talk more about the execution part, but Molly, bullish, like unpack that a little bit more. Like what made you pick that word?
It's a plan that is all about AI, America is all in, very big, grand ambitions. And I would say extraordinarily bullish on the upsides of the tech. And we can get into sort of my feelings on that. But if you read this plan, it's a huge booster, not only for the country, but for the technology itself.
All right, it's great. Miles, say a little bit more, like on the you had not hesitated, but used a little bit of like qualifiers there. So like, what led you to say that?
Yeah, so I think that the way I would put it is that the plan, first of all, it's a plan. It's not a realized outcome. And so there's going to be a lot of work required to execute on it. And much of that will require a lot of talent and government capacity and
Yeah.
agility. And I think right now the federal government is facing a lot of challenges on those fronts, including funding cuts in some of the areas where, that might be necessary for executing on this plan, as well as things like, strict political vetting for appointees, which will sometimes filter out some talented researchers and engineers in AI. So actually executing on these details, I think, is a separate question from from whether these are the right goals.
All right. And then Will, I mean, talk to us a little bit about how, I mean, again, I think these are great points that it's a plan. There's this implementation
Yeah.
gap, but I mean, do you feel like it got the right balance between accelerating innovation, but also bringing in some accountability into this mix?
Yeah, that's the reason I'd said positive because I'm generally positive on this plan. I think there are some qualifiers that I would have with it, very similar to Miles. There's kind of this big discussions going on right now. I mean, this really comes on the heels of this big debate over the AI moratorium that was happening in Congress over basically over the one big beautiful bill. But this question really about responsibility or having some sort of oversight, and then the question of kind of pushing the gas on AI. That's the thing that I think is what you're seeing different with the Trump administration as compared to the Biden administration. Trump administration is really all in on trying to make AI as to give it the resources that it needs and to direct the government to put its weight behind things, but put its weight behind research, put its weight behind open source, kind of a whole range of different kind of research and development projects. But then there's this other sort of question about accountability, right? Oversight. How do we make sure that consumers and people are not being taken advantage of by companies? And I think that's where we're going to see, I don't want to say wiggle room, but there's going to be a lot of back and forth. There's going to be a lot of court cases. The kind of nitty-gritty stuff that I care about and that we all care about as policy analysts, that's really where this accountability angle is going to come from. And it's going to come from many different sources. It's going to come from court cases and from agencies, going after potentially bad actors. So we've seen a lot of this within the AI action plan, right? There's a lot that's in there. It's 26 pages. It's actually pretty dense. There's 100+ recommendations or so. But there are a couple key ones that I've really been trying to understand. One of them is directing the FTC to look at all of the court cases that it currently has, or investigations rather, that it has open, looking at all of these companies. And that was a big thing that the last Biden administration was really trying to do. So I think we're gonna basically, I think this is really the end to the beginning. I think this is really the very first part of the Trump administration's desire to take some sort of action on AI. And again, I think it's really gonna be important to see what comes as far as executables, what the timelines are. And the other thing I would say is there's another research and development plan that's also in the works currently that the Trump administration has said that they're going to they basically teed it up in this action plan. So I think that those two things are going to be kind of the more comprehensive view and understanding of what the Trump administration really wants to do on AI.
Well, maybe just like one follow question, because
Yeah.
The plan isn't just merely about taking advantage of the software side of AI,
No,
but
no.
there's a lot that's a lot of the recommendations are dedicated to building out data centers, to
Yeah.
fortifying and strengthening the power grid and the energy that's needed to power the compute. I mean, talk a little bit about that. Like, there's so much in the physical infrastructure that's kind of laid out here, but what
Yeah.
do you take away as like, and what does that mean? We have a lot of governors' offices and people that are state policymakers. How should they be leaning into this moment with data centers and power grids and thinking of that as an economic growth mechanism?
Yeah, so I mean, if you are at the state level, please, reach out to any of us because we've been trying to interpret and understand what's going on here. The thing I would suggest that you should be conscientious of would be some of the categorical exemption language. So basically, categorical exemptions are these kind of escape valves for certain kinds of projects that hit certain kinds of limits, and so they don't have to go through the traditional National Environmental Policy Act review, the traditional NEPA review. That was something the Trump administration very directly laid out, was basically allowing for for categorical exemptions, a set limitation for data centers to basically go through this review incredibly quickly. So it seems like that would probably be happening. The directive and where it's actually going to go towards, which agency will be the direct lead, that I think is still going to have to get worked out a little bit. There has been conversations that are going on at the Trump administration also, as far as trying to streamline permitting review. And that's really what I saw. I mean, within the document, there's a lot about that. Within streamlining permitting review, there's this idea of, Fast 41. There's a whole bunch of these programs that they're trying to extend to data centers. And that's really the primary focus, or a lot of the impetus as far as the action plan is concerned. Again, what that means, there's also some other things I don't want to deny. There's some research and development money that they're suggesting should go to some of this. But again, there isn't really hard details on what exactly the amount that they want, or exactly what that timeline should look like, the dates and times that we should get these deliverables. So again, this is a pretty big plan, but a lot of the specifics really do need to be fleshed out.
No, it's great. Okay, we'll talk about implementation. Great points on that. Miles, we're just so fortunate and just so grateful for you to be here. You bring such a different perspective. I mean, especially from just being inside of one of these frontier model companies. Talk to us a little bit about what Avery is, but then I wanted to ask, I think a lot of people thought this is a plan that, or saying this is a plan that just accelerates AI regardless. But there's actually a fair amount of language and recommendations built in there about evaluations and testing of these frontier models, and tasking certain parts of the federal government to engage in that. So maybe tell us a little bit about Avery. I'd love just your thoughts on what you think they got right, what maybe they missed a little bit on the evaluation side, and what would you like to see come out of an AI evaluations ecosystem?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll first just say that I'll happy to speak to Avery, but I'll be generally talking in my personal capacity today, since I'll be touching on things that Avery doesn't work on as well. So Avery, the AI Verification and Evaluation Research Institute, is basically a nonprofit that's trying to make third-party auditing of frontier AI systems effective and universal. So basically, we'd like to see a world where the very most capable AI systems are independently assessed for safety and security risks by third parties, and that is a rigorous process rather than just a box ticking exercise. And right now, that's generally voluntary today, and it's not very far short of the standard for rigor that we'd like to see, and that we see in other technologies like airplane safety, for example. And so Avery is focused on figuring out what does that look like on the supply sides, like how do you actually conduct a safety and security audit for these very capable AI systems that are evolving very rapidly and in a way that is nimble and technically literate. And then on the demand side, how can you how can you stimulate demand for that through insurance markets, procurement policies, and so forth. In terms of the action plan, there was a lot of interesting stuff around evaluation. So I'll flag one part that I thought was very important. So it said the most powerful AI systems may pose novel national security risks in the near future in areas such as cyber attacks and the development of chemical, biological, radiological, etc. weapons, as well as novel security vulnerabilities. Understanding the nature of these risks as they emerge is vital for national defense and homeland security. So I think that's a really important policy statement, and there are a bunch of details about what it tasks the federal government with executing on. And essentially the way I'd summarize it is trying to invest in ways to build the government's AI brain. So kind of literacy and understanding and situational awareness of this field as it's evolving, particularly at the frontier, so that we can manage those risks. And I think that's really important. Other things that I would flag, in addition to just speeding up innovation and speeding up AI development and deployment, also security. There's some very important stuff here around things like export controls and kind of protecting domestic AI intellectual property from theft, building more secure data centers for national security uses. So I think all of those are very important. I think there are questions about how well it'll be executed in practice, given some of the talent bottlenecks in the federal government, as well as what we're seeing there being apparent political rifts and disagreements about some of these topics like export controls, even within the administration. But as these things are articulated in the action plan, I very much endorse them.
Miles, talk a little bit because the plan does lean a little bit into third-party AI evaluations. And I don't want to say that's a complete departure of where the Biden administration was, but there was a little bit of, for a while, there was a big debate in Washington, D.C., and frankly, in other sort of regions of the world too, about whether or not you need to centralize some of these evaluations and whether that should be a federal responsibility. But the plan here, again, it talks about some of these evaluations, but it also talks about this rigorous third-party AI evaluation ecosystem. And maybe just unpack that, because we have some people on the call today who are going to be in states that are procuring some of these systems and they could benefit from that. There's some people on the call today too that could be participating and actually creating some of these evaluations, especially in the philanthropic space. But what do you hope to kind of see in a third-party sort of system that the plan lays out there?
Yeah, so part of why, Avery exists and why we're trying to build this third-party evaluation ecosystem is because it's kind of a middle path between two extremes that both don't seem ideal. One is you kind of rely on the government to do everything and kind of command and control and kind of, running all the testing through the government. I think there's a role for government in evaluation, such as at NIST. But that, I think there are big challenges with that approach. And then on the other end of the spectrum is, companies are completely, checking their own homework. There's no one kind of poking around. It's kind of like a world with publicly traded companies that don't have auditors checking their financial statements. So that's a bit of a crazy situation as well. And so this third party ecosystem that is technically literate and well incentivized and and that is given the access that they need in order to do rigorous assessment of the risk of these models is really important. I would also just add that it's not really one thing, and one thing that comes through in the action plan is that there's a need for all sorts of different evaluations, all sorts of different standards. It's not like there's a single kind of blueprint for everything. Rather, there are national security evaluations that need to be run. There are kind of economic impact evaluations that need to be run. And the action plan calls for all sorts of different initiatives in different sectors and at different agencies to kind of, again, grow build out the government's AI brain, but also build out the larger economic this larger ecosystem throughout the U.S. economy to better understand the impacts of AI.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, that's actually a great way to bring Molly into the conversation too, because I mean, one of the impacts, it's very hard to be engaging in any AI conversation these days without it not immediately go to, is AI complementing the labor force or is it going to displace jobs? And is it going to climb up higher up those rungs of the ladder and hit more high skilled and white collar jobs? Or is it going to create a whole lot of new jobs that we can't anticipate? And economists are debating this. The plan makes reference to that. But Molly, the plan asserts, and I thought like in a language with more certainty than what I hear in a lot of conversations, I know you do too, that AI will improve the lives of Americans by complementing their work, not replacing it. And I know there's only a few words, but that's actually a pretty bold sort of prediction in these debates around labor force impacts. Love for you to just react to that and just like, what are you thinking? What's your research telling you, and how should we be thinking about AI's impact in labor market?
Great. Well, first, John, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. This is such a great group of thinkers. My first thing I want to say is I think it's a very good sign that this action plan does have a strong focus on workers. And this is actually something Miles said in our pre-chat before this event started. I think it's actually a really powerful signal of how bipartisan the moment is, that we need to really make sure workers are not harmed in this process and they really benefit. I'm hearing a lot from policymakers on the left side of the aisle. We're hearing from the Trump administration, from folks like Steve Bannon, really taking this seriously. And I would say a lot of the core tenets elements in the action plan vis-a-vis workers would probably get a bipartisan support. The focus on AI skills, investing in workforce development, the research component. You're going to hear folks, across the board really welcome some of these approaches. But you asked a different question, which is getting to the rhetoric, not only in the plan, but John, I tuned in for the full all-in podcast. I listened to JD Vance's speech. I listened to a lot of the other discussion because that gave a lot more color and context to how are the folks in the White House really thinking about this, just beyond the plan. And that's where I disagree with some of the emphasis. So, there is my strapline when it comes to AI and work is that when it comes to workers, AI brings both wonder and worry. And those two things are true at the same time. This is a plan that was all about the wonder. It was very bullish, going back to my original statement that AI is going to unlock, a renaissance and all this human flourishing. It's going to complement, not automate. If you had tuned into the full day of discussion, the venture capitalists, the industrialists, the technologists were all cherry picking examples of ways that workers benefit. I will note there was no workers on stage, no civil society organizations, no academics touting the benefits. It was really coming from industry. But this notion that AI is all the wonder and there's nothing to worry about, I don't think is grounded in the data, the evidence. And I think importantly, it's not where the American public is in terms of their own concerns. Economists and labor economists and experts are all over the map on the extent to which AI is augmenting, whether we're going to be seeing an AGI. Is this going to sort of replace all humans? Is this going to grow jobs overall? What new jobs? There's no consensus. But I would say even in very divergent visions of the future, most folks think we are not just in a physical industrial revolution, which was a lot of what the plan talked about, was the physical building out of AI infrastructure. We're entering an AI cognitive industrial revolution, and there are going to be winners and losers. Even if we get into a world where total jobs don't decline, we don't face an AI apocalypse, I don't think there's very many experts who don't think there are going to be some people who are going to be displaced, who are going to be on the wrong end of that. I think even if you look at labor data right now, you look at customer service workers, already you're seeing a decline. In the newspaper today, there's a discussion about entry-level workers, whether or not we're already seeing some declines. I don't share the administration's bullishness, this notion that by definition, AI is only going to augment. And I think the fact that they're making those statements is a flaw in the way they're thinking about the challenge ahead. They're defining this as like this great American invention, and it could only be great, and this Trump administration has bad. So, immigration is bad, or trade is bad. And in fact, JD Vance got a question about, or was discussing the potential decline in software developer jobs. He pointed to immigration. And actually, I think there's going to be a lot more nuance. I think there's going to be winners and losers, and it's going to be a hard transition. And by making it seem like there's no trade-off, this is just something we all have to get the skills, there are a lot of important things that were left out of the plan if it was truly going to be pro-worker.
Well, maybe just elaborate a little bit on that. What do you think, what would a good worker-centric strategy look like in the context of AI? And maybe also not at the federal level in terms of Department of Labor and the Department of Ed. We have a bunch of state chambers of commerce and some, again, governor's offices on watching this today. What are you hoping they do now to kind of prepare for this wave, however it sort of crests and hits their states and their communities?
Yeah, so a few things. First, I would say I really want to make sure especially the Trump administration widens their aperture about who is a worker. I was struck that all the investments in apprenticeship and the infrastructure workforce, that was really the most built out in terms of, developing new jobs and new skills. They were all hard hats. It was sort of the trades. It was sort of electricians in the data centers. If you look at where the anxiety is about the jobs that stand to get displaced, it is not in the skilled trades. It is not in manufacturing and construction. It is in female-dominated, high-quality, office and administrative support roles. I'm in the process of interviewing a lot of these women right now for a report I'm doing, and I've asked them, have you ever thought about going into the skilled trades? And they've all said, absolutely not. So the idea that there might be some sort of electrician jobs in data centers isn't going to sort of satisfy the anxiety of a bunch of college students fretting about whether or not there's going to be jobs at the other end, or in the creative industry, which is seeing disruption. So I'd like to see a widening of the aperture of really who is a worker and make sure that sort of the investments we're making match. Second thing is, I'll be honest, I don't think we have a workforce development system, a higher ed system, or a safety net that is fit for purpose for the kind of disruption ahead. I mean, this is again, a cognitive industrial revolution. Our workforce development system, by and large, is mostly putting people into lower wage jobs. This is really, it's not even set up to really sort of help the kind of workers who are probably going to be displaced. I applaud the administration's focus on AI skills. I think that's necessary but not sufficient. What I'm really hoping to see is much more innovation around how do we make sure the American workforce is able to get the kind of skills and experience that AI can't do, whether that's higher level critical thinking or judgment or some of these interpersonal skills. The other thing that was really not talked about was workers really need a seat at the table. This was very much talking about workers as simply sort of a workforce development story. I think there was no unions reference. There was no sort of idea that sort of workers are going to be part of steering the future and shaping it. The other thing I'd say is, especially at the state level, states are really leading on legislation and regulation that's addressing some of the AI harms that are not about job loss. They're about things like surveillance and algorithmic management, which are very well documented. And so I think states are really leading on that front. And finally, I think I applaud the administration in the notion that they need more experimentation and pilots. I think this is really something where state and local can lead. We do not have ready-made systems and policies set up to meet this moment. We need to think differently. And business has a really important role to play. We should have higher expectations of our employers when it comes to how they're treating their workers with AI. Big story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, companies basically bragging about using AI to reduce headcount. I don't think that's going to end well for the American worker.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's a great point too, that we have so much of our workforce system. I worked a lot on trade adjustment assistance, and it always struck me as someone saying that if you lose your job because of trade, you got all this sort of generous set of benefits, but if you lost your job to automation, you didn't get any of that. And we were losing many more jobs to automation, and that was a pre AI or pre ChatGPT sort of era that we're kind of going into now too. It's also a great
And I
chance.
also think it's going to be more about like not getting hired in the first place. This isn't going to look like a factory shutting down. Our policies for our safety net, for instance, there's going to be people who just don't get hired in the first place. That doesn't count in the sort of you've been laid off, so you get this special. Like, we need to think really differently. Safety net was something totally missing from this plan. I think it stems from this refusal to admit that there could be losses. And I think if we admit that there's going to be some pain, I think we would design differently, and it would include the safety net.
That's great. Not great about the losses, great about the safety net and your points. Will, like you mentioned this, but I think it's like worth one click deeper, because there was one sort of, there were several parts that this differed in path from the Biden administration's AI blueprint and some of their actions. But one was around open source and open weight models. The Biden administration, I mean, there's a little bit of like try to have it both ways, and there was like a non-committal sort of posture in that. The AI action plan does a very hard commitment on open weight and open models, and maybe you could just unpack like why that was significant, and just what do you think that means in terms of for U.S. AI leadership?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to be very clear on where exactly this is coming from. So this is, the focus here is primarily on the government side, right? Government and data access on research and stuff that's supported by the government. There wasn't really any call for legislative. Maybe I missed it, but I don't think there was any call for any legislative agreement on open source. I'm sorry. And so what that looks like, I think, to put that in context, right? What we're seeing specifically with China, and I think there's something, there's kind of an interesting little back and forth that's going on here, but in part because China is, constrained in its resources, because of restrictions on chips and such, that there has been a lot of the companies have really put a lot of emphasis on making open source models. And as a result, a lot of developers and builders, both in China and the United States, are building upon these open source models, primarily through open weights. So, you have access to these kind of, like I said, the open weights part of it. Not that it's not like the entire program is open in the way that we typically think of open source. But what that means is that at least some of the kind of fundamental technologies are potentially going to be built upon the open models of Alibaba and of Baidu and of DeepSeek. And I think that there is this worry, very real, which is that if the United States doesn't have a similar drive and a similar emphasis on open source, that we're going to lose out on that, and that the fundamental infrastructure of the AI revolution is going to be Chinese and not necessarily the United States. So one big development is that OpenAI has said that they're going to be developing, and I think they should be probably releasing it. My assumption is soon, probably with the release of ChatGPT 5. I could be wrong in that, but broadly speaking, they've said they're working on these kind of open weights. Meta, Facebook has been working a lot on pushing their open weight models. So there is this emphasis, and very clearly to drill down very clearly, there's a lot of mention that within the AI action plan. And I think the big contrast here is that under the Biden executive order, there wasn't really all that much of a mention of open source models. It was far more focused on other materials, but not in the executive order that was on trustworthy AI that the Biden administration put out in the middle of the administration. So I think that what we're seeing is these two different approaches that, first and foremost, under the action plan, it really, this emphasis on open source and about competition and about innovation is really front and center. It's at the very beginning of the plan. It was the emphasis also of things that Trump had said in his comments to release the plan. And I think that was very different than the Biden administration, which is much more on trustworthy AI and safety and collaboration. And to the credit of Biden administration, there was more reference to working with unions and collaboration across the aisle and stakeholders, and we really just don't see as much of that in the AI action plan. I think that just shows kind of the different approaches that have been developed or are developing between the two different parties and how they understand the relationship to AI. And whether or not this happens and this continues, I think is going to be again, it's a big open question. And especially as problems potentially pop up, you might see reactions to this. And that's something I'm also trying to keep close attention to is really how people are interpreting the problems with workers, the problems with labor, the problems with kids and mental health, and all of these things. I think it's opening up a new battle and a new series of battles in fronts in the war over tech.
Yeah, no, it's great points. It's also, I think it's interesting, the evolution, the open weighted and open source models too. Like initially it was just sort of Meta with Llama, and now Google has a whole sort of line of open weighted models. To your point, ChatGPT, OpenAI wants to come up and release. NVIDIA has some, which is a very different point. You also had Mark Zuckerberg do a very lengthy essay that talked about and Sam Altman in the Washington Post arguing something similar too, about it's important to have models that are embedded with American values and liberal democratic values and principles, and have that lead the global adoption as opposed to ceding that to China. It seems like the Trump administration has taken that view. Miles, I want to bring you back in because you out of everyone on the call, you've had the most experience with setting up red teaming and testing on safety and security for models. There's a lot that was talked about, especially in national security and DoD context, but about red teaming. And just kind of curious, like, do you think we're going to see a federal AI red teaming standard emerge from this work? Or how do you just sort of see that playing out? And how will that sit vis-a-vis some of these, what the frontier model companies are doing themselves? And then what like experts like yourself are also building kind of in the ecosystem there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's honestly a bit hard to say how it's all going to play out because there are several things happening at once. There's, the evolution of what used to be called the U.S. AI Safety Institute. Now it's the Center for AI Standards and Innovation. There's also a similar thing in the UK. And there's also the AI Act, which is starting to go into force, and that has some requirements around safety testing. And then, of course, there all daily stories and incidents around kind of AI safety, and there was the Grok stuff recently, and other sorts of things that are kind of raising attention to these things. I don't know what exactly the standard how the standards are going to play out, but I think what we're definitely going to see is that the government is going to focus on the things that they're best equipped to do, which is specifically around national security. So I think there are a bunch of things around, bias and economic impact and so forth, where I think the government is going to be encouraging exploration. But I think what we'll probably see is a kind of a particular attention to a few areas which were called out in this report. So for example, biological security. So there was a section that was kind of that I quoted from before, and then after that, it talked about how we need to prepare for the possibility of people kind of misusing systems to create, biological threats. And so that's an area where I think we'll continue to see investment because the government has this comparative advantage. They have the national security agencies, they have the intelligence agencies, they can kind of look at what's happening abroad. They can also, in other areas like nuclear security, they can kind of assess like, okay, is this model actually a major, is this actually a major risk? Is this actually that different from what's already available on Google or from other sources? And so I think that's where the government will play a key role. I think one question that is very unclear is whether there will be requirements to participate in this kind of testing regime. Right now, it's voluntary. This was something that changed there were reporting requirements under the Biden administration that were removed under the Trump administration for basically kind of sharing like, okay, for our biggest models, here are our safety findings, and for models above a certain threshold, that's no longer in place. So I think that will be one area where, in addition to kind of informally setting best practices and being an ally to the companies, I think it'll be interesting to see whether the Trump administration requires, say, a company that doesn't really play ball, doesn't do want to do these testing and drags its feet, or whether they have to be participating with the Center for AI Standards and Innovation.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. That also gets into this very murky area of do they have the legal authority to compel companies? And I know the Biden administration was squinting and looking at the Defense Production Act as to whether or not it gave that. I think there's like a little bit of an open question. And then that also illustrates something else I meant to say with Will. I remember doing one of the White House briefings before. They had said one of the constraints they had placed on the plan is that it could only be the plan had to be constrained to what they could be done with executive authorities. So that's why there's not much in terms of legislative calls to action or some things that might require legislation. I thought that was interesting, and I think part of the reason we see some silence on some issues that might require some additional sort of congressional appropriation. But Molly, like there is a lot, built into the plan, and we've seen actually subsequently, even before that, some executive orders around AI literacy, around some workforce issues. There's this one sort of peculiar, very specific proposal in the action plan, leveraging Section 132. Who doesn't want to leverage that? The tax code. So
long overdue.
Yes, who could offer tax-free reimbursement for AI training. And so I again, like I'm teasing, but it's like I thought that was an underutilized sort of provision in the tax code that doesn't often get talked about in workforce development circles. But do you think that's going to have a meaningful debate? Like how can people use that? What else do you hope is people should take away with AI literacy?
No, my general view on AI literacy is that it's important. It's necessary, but I'm a little worried that we put all of our eggs just in that basket. I would say it's far from sufficient. So I also think, I think the Trump administration is correct to put a lot of focus on that, especially where we are. We're not going to see big productivity gains that workers could benefit from until they learn these tools. And there's lots of sort of benefits for workers that are being left on the table by, sort of not having the skills to use it. but I think there's some limitations. And, one of the things I've been wrestling with, which your question about sort of innovative financing models from the government, what can the public sector do to make sure workers are benefiting? I've actually been thinking about a little bit differently. That's not just about the AI skills, but there's been this kind of raging debate in the papers about the potential impact of generative AI in knocking off the first rung of the career ladder. And John, you and I have been sort of going back and forth about this for months. I wrote a piece way back in November about it. And there was Burning Glass Institute just put out a big report this morning that the Wall Street Journal covered. It's not clear to me we yet see clear evidence in the elevated unemployment rates of recent college grads that it's definitely AI responsible for it. But I think a lot of us just intuitively understand that career ladders are going to change. And it's not only going to be AI skills that's the ticket out of there. In some ways, AI is going to itself, especially through agents as they become more powerful, and John, you're always very astute about this, as AI becomes more agentic and can take on more complex and longer sequences of tasks, a lot of what early career knowledge workers do is just going to get automated. There is a real risk that employers are going to expect younger people to come in, not at level one, where they start green and sort of learn with lower stakes jobs and slowly work themselves up. They might expect them to come in much more seasoned. And the crunch is not going to be whether they can sort of use ChatGPT or Harvey AI, which frankly are fairly intuitive. You don't need a master's degree to sort of use a user-friendly AI tool. I don't want to I think we might be overstating how much we actually need to study some of this to start using it. What we might have the gap in is experience. And we have a lot of careers where on day one you have to be ready. If you're a doctor, you have to be a doctor on day one. If you're a teacher, a first-year teacher has the same job as a 20-year teacher. You got to be ready on day one. A lot of knowledge jobs they're tiered. That tiered approach could be falling apart. And so I'm working on some innovative ideas for how white collar jobs might need to look like medicine, with more of a medical residency approach, where you're actually training for higher stakes, higher level work under the tutelage of someone more senior. And that's publicly funded. Medical residencies, the public funding pays for the time of the teaching staff, the doctors. So I think we should be thinking really creatively, not just about AI skills. I'm worried we're putting all of our eggs just in that basket.
Yeah.
It's important, it's necessary, but we might be facing some really disruptive changes ahead. And I'd like to see, really thinking differently about public funding. What about, every tech leader saying how easy it is to become a solopreneur, start your own venture? Well, how many young people have the economic security to do that? How can you go broke for AI when you're broke? Why could we be thinking about ways to give people more economic security? There's just lots of ways we can be thinking much more creatively about using our public resources, our incentives. We might be mandating companies to have those kind of learning opportunities for young people. So
Yes.
I think it's an interesting start, but I would hope that state level leaders, federal leaders are going well beyond only sort of noodling over how do we expand AI skills.
Yeah, great point. It's a great point too on the learning on the job. And it's interesting. I mean, again, if there's anything that has bipartisan consensus in DC right now, it's apprenticeships. And you see that literally going from Bush to Obama, Obama to Trump, Trump to Biden, and back. And the apprenticeships make an appearance in this multiple points about learning on the job. And it's a good.
But here's my pushback on that, John. Again, this goes back to my point. Please, Trump administration, widen your aperture for who is a worker. If you really get up every morning just thinking about how to make sure men without a college degree have a good job, you're going to leave most of the workers who are vulnerable for this technology. The vast majority of our apprenticeships are in the trades.
That's right. Yeah.
That is not who's that's actually the safe zone. That is the safe zone that's not going to get disrupted by Gen AI. So if we're thinking about what's getting disrupted, it's tens of millions, if not more white collar jobs, as well as female dominated office-based customer service and clerical. What are the apprenticeship models for that? And so I think we need to be thinking if there's philanthropists on this event, this is a great place for you. I think we need a lot of new models. Let's not just say we've got apprenticeships, so we've solved this. I actually think what we need to solve for has changed so much. We need some fresh thinking.
Yeah, I love it. One question, we're going to go to some audience Q&A, but there's something Will said. I actually want to connect a couple of different dots, and Molly, something you and I have talked about too, but Will Will talked a little bit about some of the mental health issues with our youth right now, and I think the AI moratorium. I know one of the flashpoints with the Senate that kind of led to the AI moratorium getting taken out of the one big beautiful bill was issues around child safety. I think we're seeing every single day there's new articles coming out about kids and AI chatbots and whether or not these are healthy relationships, what it does to social connections and social networks, and just it makes me think a little bit of what Miles was saying in terms of risk. And often we think about AI and existential external risks, bioweapons, cyber attacks. But I wonder if there's this intrinsic risk that needs to also be studied. And I don't know who. I'd love to just invite all three of you to kind of like maybe comment on that and like what do we need at this moment, when there's such a heated debate around social media and around cell phones and that impact on kids' mental health. But what do we need right now to kind of get ahead of that in terms of the AI moment? And then we'll go to some amazing questions that are coming in from the audience. Anyone want to take that?
Sure, I'll take that a bit. I mean, one thing I would say is that you really, I know this isn't the best answer, and I don't think anyone really wants to hear it, but you do need to let things play out a bit, right? I mean, this is exactly what happened with social media, and there's still a lot of really intense debate about about the mental health impacts of social media. It seems to affect primarily teenage girls during a very specific time period of their life, 13 to 15, and then about 19 to 20. But that's hotly debated, right? Even within the social media realm and research over social media, that is a hotly debated topic. In part, what this is going to require is probably, some of the things that have been mentioned, but better understanding and better data. We're only now kind of having consistent surveys of mental health for teenagers, and the CDC has actually been doing a lot of, I think, really critical work in trying to connect various data sets. This also kind of relates to something that is going on. There was a lot of conversation, or at least some mention in the action plan about trying to connect various data sets on workers and trying to understand how various industries are changing and are being impacted by AI and various systems. I think that we really probably actually need to redo a lot of those surveys. I don't think that they're very well constructed, right? The surveys ask, mid-level managers how their lower level employees are using the technologies. There's only like a 12% response rate for most of these companies. It's incredibly low. So even the stuff that we really do need to know about, I think that we do, we've been working on this. I think there's better ways of actually trying to understand the worker impacts, but I think the same thing is also needs to happen with child safety, which we need better research. We need better understandings of when schools, for example, get rid of phones, right? That hasn't been studied particularly, not all that much. There's, kind of research here and there from
More
various
research.
schools.
Yeah.
But point being is that it took us a long while to even really get up to date and understanding about what's going on in social media, and I think it's also going to take some time to learn that as well for what happens with ChatGPT and LLMs and all these new technologies.
Great. Miles?
Yeah, so I don't have a kind of comprehensive proposal for how to study this issue of kind of the impact on kids, but I'll just give some reasons why it's hard and like some rough gesture in terms of the solution. So I think part of the challenge is that again there are many different kinds of impacts of AI. There are many different types of AI, and I think that there's kind of a different set of expertises and skills that are required to study like long-term effects on children versus is this AI capable of producing a, powerful malware or, and then that in turn is different from, bioweapons and so forth. And so I think some of the challenges include sensitivity around the data. So some of this data, it isn't just about the model, it's also about, how is the platform being used? And, and some of that's, very sensitive data, including kids and, companies don't even, in some cases want, they might have a policy that says you're not even allowed to use the platform if you're a kid. And so there's a lot of complexity around that. And then there's also kind of academic incentives and timescales. So academia, frankly, moves pretty slowly and isn't always studying kind of the very latest and greatest models and isn't able to turn around like a study very quickly. And so like how do you have this fast moving industry that has sensitive data work with this, with academic institutions that can sometimes move slowly and like might not necessarily and might have different sets of incentives like around publishing and getting tenure and so forth versus focus focusing on the issues that are currently, salient for policymakers. So it's a big problem. I think part of the solution might be some kind of carve outs around kind of safe harbors for kind of working with third party auditors where, companies know that they're not going to kind of get in trouble if they kind of open up
Yeah.
their books to work with third party researchers to understand these issues, and there's some positive incentive to do so. But right now, I think things are
Yeah.
moving pretty slowly in terms of actually understanding things.
Right, Molly wants to jump in too.
It'll be really quick.
We have 10 minutes left, and so want to get to 2 audience questions and then have one good closing one for all of you. So go ahead,
I'll
Molly.
be super quick. I would just say I answer this question as a mom of 3 kids, 10 and under. And I will say this is one of the many ways I wrote to John last night saying one of my criticisms of this action plan is it treats AI like something that's about America. It's America's going to win. This is America. And the vast majority of Americans aren't going to experience this as something that's about America beating China. It's as Americans. It's about their kids having exposure to AI companions. It's in their job. And I didn't see, there was no civil society voices in that entire day. And that's a huge problem. It was all industry. It was all about rushing ahead. It was all these national goals. This is something that's going to impact people profoundly and individually. There's going to be no trust if you don't have, what Will was talking about, partnership, bringing in outside groups, civil society, academics to make sure we're doing this in a responsible way.
Great points. Hard ones too. Like, I think this is like part of we're all wrestling with this in real time. And we have a great question that's just come in from our mutual good friend, Trooper Sanders, who said, assuming American innovation achieves breakthroughs in areas such as drug discovery, what should we be doing now to ensure the systems that deploy AI and use discoveries generated by AI, like our healthcare system, can ensure AI innovations are diffused for real lives? And actually, I think there's a bigger question there too. I was sort of shocked. There was hardly any mention. There was no mention about HHS or FDA or NIH in the action plan. And maybe that's because it was a national security orientation. But Troopers hitting on something where in Silicon Valley, you can't throw a rock and hit someone who's not working on AI and healthcare and drug discovery and curing diseases. And that seemed like surprisingly absent from this plan. But does anyone want to take that? Like, what should the federal government be doing now to help make sure we're accelerating some of those discoveries and then deploying them in a safe and reasonable way?
I can take a bit of that. I mean, the FDA itself is its own beast, and I think that separate from this conversation is a conversation on how to implement properly AI within the medical context, right? And we do know that the FDA, for example, has each of their kind of different offices have a different pipeline. There's different pathways. So stuff that goes through oncology has a slightly different way that goes through, say, antivirus medication. And so FDA itself is the more I've only been following it probably for 5 or 6 years at this point, really closely, and I am humbled by just how complicated the system is for getting drugs and medical discoveries through the pipeline. It's incredibly complicated. There's this kind of constant reference and close collaboration between the FDA and a lot of these companies that are working on these new systems. All this is to say is that the diffuse question, I think, it's a tough one, because even stuff that we're seeing through, GLP-1s are incredibly expensive. A lot of some incredibly new, the hepatitis drug was incredibly expensive. So even stuff that, isn't fully AI developed in the way that the new class of drugs and new class of drug systems are coming, into the pipeline, those are expensive regardless, even through their development costs. And drugs cost billions of dollars to get through the pipeline. This entire system is just getting incredibly costly. So the diffuse question, to me, probably needs to get separated from the AI innovation question. And I think that's probably also for another day to walk through that, because I just think there's so much that goes into that.
That's a good point. I'll jump in here too, and then we're going to close out with 2 questions for all of you. But the plan, it was something I really celebrated. The plan where these regulatory sandboxes, and Miles made reference to this, but I think that's you see an early prototype of this with the Coalition for Health AI, CHAI, which I know was at the event, and been trying out a model here, bringing in regulators like the FDA and NIH and HHS with research hospitals and institutions with the actual innovators. And there's sort of this mutual sense of trying to engage this and better understand the technologies and the opportunities and the risks there. And I'm not sure if that's going to be the model that necessarily wins out at the end of the day, but it's an early sort of experiment that seems like worthy of learning on. Okay, so last two questions because we're closing at the top of the hour. But just what section of the plan do you think is the most underappreciated, but potentially the most impactful over the next 5 years? And maybe what we'll do is we'll go Molly, Miles, Will. So we'll start with Molly.
You didn't go alphabetically, you made me go first. I mean, in my my main focus is on the work front. I think what is getting no attention is the call for more pilots and experimentation. I think this is something that is so needed. I can't emphasize enough. I don't think we have the policies and solutions in place now. This is a new challenge. We're going to be surprised endlessly. We really need to think outside the box. And just, it wasn't the question, but I will say a criticism I failed to point out was, it's not clear to me there's new money here.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we can get away. Great focus on workers, but where's the money for this? And I think the disparity between the investments in physical infrastructure and AI and American human infrastructure is just enormous. So, great that there's some sort of innovative focus, but where's the money?
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, Will?
Yeah, we really haven't talked about it really at all. But I think the first section in the near term, given the fact that these other constraints that we've talked about, right? I mean, again, I think this is a really positive step forward as far as the document is concerned, and probably the biggest true impact that's going to exist, or the biggest place where we're going to see impact is probably in the beginning sections. So one of the big things that they had suggested, or at least hinted at, was kind of it kind of looks almost like a government-wide regulatory cleanup, and this is something that I have been supportive of. Right, we go through and we actually look at the requirements that exist agency by agency, and in the regulatory code, we figure out stuff that doesn't match. Right, oftentimes Congress will repeal a law, and yet the code will still be on the books. Virginia just went through this and did the kind of hard work of going through, and I think they cut something like 25% of their actual, code of federal regulation, their own code, without substantively changing, without any substantive changes to the code itself. They basically are doing, what software designers do, and refactoring the code. So I think that's actually probably going to be the near term, probably among the biggest changes, because that is something that you really did see that the first Trump administration actually had a really interesting pilot project through a company called Esper and HHS, and they seem to have done at least some of this under a pilot project in 2019, I want to say. But I think near term, this kind of regulatory cleanup effort could be really impactful, clean up things, and it also would make a lot more of the code, ensure that it's machine readable, ensure that it's accessible. And to me, I've been really supportive of this, because then we can start, putting in the Code of Federal Regulations in with our understanding of economic development, and actually start doing more complicated modeling so we can understand how, for example, bill changes will impact the economy, how regulatory changes will impact the economy, and will give us a better sense of the true cost of doing government and doing business. That I think actually could be a really big shift and change in the more nuts and bolts of government that I don't think people are really paying attention to. But given that there aren't strong timelines and deadlines and a whole bunch of money that's dedicated in some of the other spaces, this seems like it's a place where things really could happen.
Great point, Will. Miles?
Yeah, so something that I think is underappreciated is the discussion of data center security, and it's a bit of a niche topic to some folks, but I'll make the plug for why I think it's super important. Is that we're talking about this competition with China, and we could do all these things to build larger data centers, train better models and so forth, and then, the models get stolen, the day that they're trained by China and Russia. That's not a good situation. And so it's good to see the action plan, talking about the need for secure data centers, for national security uses. I would go even further and, say that we need to make sure that the biggest private sector data centers are also secure, because, you don't want to have the model stolen before you even get it to the kind of government data center after it's trained in the private sector. But I think that's really important, even though it has little to do with my day job.
Great point. Okay. Last lightning round. We started with the lightning round. We're going to close with the lightning round. So like 10, 20 seconds. How should we judge the success of this plan 12 and 24 months from now? So like what indicators are you going to be using to judge if we're making progress or if we're falling behind? In this case, we'll start with Miles first.
Yeah, so I'll say staffing, and I think right now, unfortunate, there's the old cliche about personnel as policy. I think that's true in this case. You need people to figure out all these details around, workforce policies, and around data center security, and national security evaluations. That requires technical expertise, program management skills, all sorts of things. And unfortunately, I hear all the time about people, even kind of card-carrying Republicans who, have expertise in AI, who are, lose out on the political vetting to join the administration because they're not considered, sufficiently MAGA. And so I think there needs to be some kind of coherent strategy to make sure that we're fully leveraging, all the talent in the country to tackle all these difficult problems.
Okay, great. Good points, Miles. Will, let's go to you next, then we'll close out with Molly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very honest. A spreadsheet. I put all of the requirements on a spreadsheet, and I have tracked them via the agencies. And this is something I'm going to be publishing either later this week or early next week. And fundamentally, yeah, I'm going to be tracking them myself. So we'll see in 12 to 24 months if the action items that are listed out here, and they're pretty explicit. We kind of know some of the stuff that's already happening, but yeah, follow along, because I'm definitely going to be tracking on my own exactly what's happening with the agencies rather.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things that was strange about this action plan, in some cases it didn't task a lead agency, but there were no timeline. So it's even hard to know kind of like, is this something we should expect in 2 years, 3 years, 6 months? But it's a great point. So thank you for that, Will. All right, Molly, what are you going to be using as your indicator for
just to build on some of Miles' point about bandwidth, there are a bunch of mentions of the Department of Education when it comes to how we're training the workforce. And as far as I'm aware, I'm not clear we have a Department of Education. So, I think there is a big question of sort of who's going to run this at a time when the core functions of what we had a Department of Education for seem to be crumbling. But I would look for, what are the real investments? Like, what actually is translating into investments in workers? Is there new sources of funding? How many people are reached? And then the second thing, what I would say would be the quality of some of the solutions and ideas that come out of this. I'm dissatisfied that this administration has sort of put together a playbook that I think could solve for some of the potential challenges facing workers. The challenge is huge. And so if this is the first step, and this is a beginning of a broader focus on really taking this seriously, what I would like to see that what comes after this is, who are you bringing to the table? Because right now it's just industry. Which workers are you focusing on? What money are you investing? And importantly, what kind of new bold ideas are coming to the table? So that's what I'm looking for.
No, that's great. I mean, that's a great point to end on, and it ties in nicely with Will and Miles too, that a lot of this is going to come to implementation. These are bullet points that now agencies have to begin enacting, and that's going to be a good chance, I think, Molly, to hit some of the points you were raising about engaging civil society, about state and local actors. I think there was a real opportunity. They could have announced this plan at the NGA summer meeting last week. I mean, there was like ways of bringing governors into the fold on this, as opposed to this tension with the AI moratorium and some of the state issues. So like, we'll have to just sort of see how this plays out. But I just want to first thank everyone for joining us today. Molly, Miles, Will, just so grateful for you and your time and helping us make sense of this moment right now. We will do this again in another 6 or 12 months, and we'll do another reevaluation of it, but just so grateful for you. And with that, we're going to sign off. So we'll thank everyone, and we'll see you for our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John.
John.